Welcome back. Schön, dass es viele von euch wieder geschafft haben, hier runterzukommen, trotz der Hitze und trotz der vielen Flipper, die da oben stehen, die auch interessant sind. Wir haben ja jetzt die Q&A-Session geplant, aber wir machen jetzt mal ein paar Minuten den letzten Vortrag zu Ende. Der darf uns noch ein bisschen erzählen, was er dann nach seiner Zeit bei Bally gemacht hat. So we will continue this, and afterwards we have the Q&A session where I leave the stage and JP comes over and people may ask questions. So, no slides for this. Doug, how did you get the notice that Williams wants to lay you off? What was? Do you remember anything about that?
I do. After Tic-Tac-Toe, I'm in my office and I want to be a game designer, no longer just an artist. I've done enough playfields and seen enough playfield engineering and design to have my own sense of taste in what I think would be a wonderful pinball game. My style of pinball layout and playfield, very Steve Ritchie, very flowing kinetics, as opposed to I want to make a whoosh, whoosh, and the designs with left and right, return lane, ramp shooting. If you're skillful at Terminator, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, payback time. I love that quality in the design of that game. If you had the skill to do it, the rewards were very, very rewarding. I came up with my own complete blueprint, my own ball guide design. The theme was Star Wars. The name of my game was Jedi Knight. I have it 90% finished. When my contract expired at Williams, thanks to the success of Indiana Jones, I went from being on the edge of being laid off by Bally, the head of design at that point, who didn't like how much time I took to do my games. We had a conflict. It was scary. He wanted to get rid of me. Mark Ritchie stepped up to the plate and said, "You can't let Doug Watson go. Look what he did on my game." So right when I thought it was ready for me to pack up and go to Capcom, Wally Sloja, the one who wanted to get rid of me, walked into my office and offered me the very first contract to an in-house Williams artist. John Yazzie had a contract from the outside. Being on contract means this: you earn a royalty. The in-house artists did not. So my first contract, my royalty was for $1 per game for Indiana Jones, and I got a check for $14,500 when I signed that contract. And then I got royalties on all the games I did following that. It was a 3-year contract. When it expired, I wanted to re-sign it. I thought the fact that they put me on contract at all meant that Williams wanted to hold on to me. I eventually tracked down Ken Podesna, the president at the time, and through perseverance, I got him to pay attention to me, and when push came to shove, he was like, "Well, Doug, we are not going to renew your contract. In fact, we have to downsize the art department, and you are our most expensive artist." Painful, hurtful, upsetting. I've just gotten married and bought a home for my family. I now have a mortgage, and now I no longer have an income. There's not a lot of work out there for ex-pinball artists. I wasn't sure what to do. Once again, went to the internet now and did some research on who's looking for artists with some sort of creative background. I found a tiny little game developer for video games in Mesa, Arizona. Hot in Arizona. You think this is heat? It's 118 Fahrenheit in the summertime in Mesa. I sent them some samples of my work. They were looking for a concept artist to design an imaginary world game for them. They didn't know what it was going to look like. They needed somebody with a lot of imagination to design a world. For instance, like EverQuest or World of Warcraft, all those giant mods where there's lots and lots of features. What does the technology look like? What do characters look like? What does the world look like? They needed an artist to design all that to develop. The company was very small, it was like 6 people. They had not a ghost of a chance of ever getting that game finished with that tiny staff. But it was an era when everybody, or it was very common for people to try to be an independent video game developer. This is the late 90s. And if you could come up with a game that could turn into a PlayStation or an Xbox success, you could build a big company off the profits of that. That was their intention and goal. That's why they hired me. And I had to leave my wife and my home and my stepson and drove my car and some belongings all the way to Arizona, where I was trying to survive on the income to pay for my apartment there, in addition to my mortgage on my home back in the Chicago area. So that was trying times financially. And the fact that I had no idea what I was doing. No idea what I was doing. The benefit of having spent a year there is that I learned the rudiments of Photoshop, which I'd never touched before. I learned what texturing was. Anyone here ever do any work in 3D gaming and know what a texture is? Okay, one person. 3D worlds are made up of polygons. You sculpt everything out of polygons. You have polygonal modeling for characters, features, everything in the world is made of polygons, and you don't see them in the game engine unless they're wrapped with a texture. That is a bitmap file painted in Photoshop that you wrap around a character, a wagon, a tree, a building, whatever features in that game. It requires a texture for it to reflect light inside that game engine. With my painting skill and talent, I was perfect for doing texture art in Photoshop. We had an art director with a 3-person art department, that's all of us. The guy who in charge was a veteran from another company. He taught me a little bit at the time Photoshop painting. And the very first day I tried it, I was better at painting than he was. And then I started making my own characters for features in the game. But the idea of being a concept artist without ever having seen a video game, like a mob, like EverQuest or World of Warcraft or any of the other fantasy worlds out there, I definitely had some experience in creating fantasy worlds as a writer and as a dungeon master for Dungeons & Dragons, which I had done for years. I had created my own imaginary world on my own, so I thought, okay, I have a chance to do this. I wasn't any good at it at all, with no training whatsoever. But I managed to last there for a year and learn how to Photoshop and learn what a texture was. I helped solve their problems because I knew other talented artists I could work with in the industry. And I contacted a friend of mine, and he started producing artwork that was sufficient to get that game moving forward. Because he was simply better at doing a kind of artwork that I was. And I'm not afraid to say, hey, if I got a better talent, I'm going to use that guy. I'm not the best even money. So I survived that for a year, then they ran out of money. As often happens in smaller developers who don't know how to budget effectively. Well, that was into that, but at least I came home with some experience in the video game industry. I translated the work I did that year in Arizona into a portfolio that got me hired by a much larger, more experienced game company in Marin County in the Bay Area of San Francisco. Luxurious offices. It was a developer that had 4 design teams at once and would trade off contracts in between. So their business model was far more successful. I worked there for a number of years and learned on the process of that job how to model in 3D Studio Max. I learned how to rig for animation in 3D Studio Max. Brand new technical skills I had never touched before. I learned on the job by having one of the animators teach me a single tool. Well, Doug, it kind of works like this, and then he'd go home. And I'd stay until midnight fighting with it and struggling with it, trying to master the concept. And I would do a little bit of this, and I tried a little bit of that, and after about a month of doing it every single day, I was good enough to say, why don't you give me my first character? Cool, built it. And I said, he looked it over. How about a second character? Cool, looked it over. The game I was working on was called Lord of the Rings for Electronic Arts. Based on the first Peter Jackson movies that came out in 2003, I think it was. Somewhere in there. So, Viggo Mortensen and Elijah Wood and all the other actors in the movie, I ended up creating their characters in 3D and making them able to animate because I knew how to make actors look like actors. So I worked there for a number of years until their fortunes went up and down, as the video game industry does. I had learned enough skills and technical expertise on that job to be able, once I was laid off from that job, along with half the company that also joined me on that layoff, and translated that into contacts in the film industry, doing special effects. Through a friend, I got a contact from a developer in Ring County called Macworld Digital, which is one of the many companies you see doing special 3D effects for film. I think they were end credits, where it goes through company after company after company after company. The way that industry works is they contract out shots. You have a shot in a movie that needs some kind of CG in it. And you hand that shot off to a developer. Could be at a workshop, could be ILM, or it could be smaller developers. I was at one of the smaller developers, but I brought my expertise there and I became something called a matte painter. You know what matte painting is for film? Okay, right here. Traditionally, matte painting was an artist would literally paint on a giant pane of glass some part of the landscape or feature or location that didn't actually exist. But he would paint it, and they had this big sheet of glass, and they would shoot a scene with actors in front of it, and there's the Eiffel Tower in the background, even though you're in the Bay Area. Or there's some special building or some recognizable landscape, and the artist could paint that whatever was not actually possible to be in the scene. As a matte painter, my job was to be part of that illusion process of creating assets for a motion picture that aren't actually really there. My first project was kind of a forgettable Mark Wahlberg movie called Invincible, which was a football movie. If you don't remember it, that's fine, I don't either. But in the making of that film, there were 3 long scenes where his character as a football player is in these giant football stadiums with camera shots that would do big sweeping, rotating, like crane shots, or now we use drones to capture shots like that. Well, there were no football stadiums in that movie at all. They had to be completely created CG. And I helped in that process of creating those football stadiums by painting matte areas with my painting skills to fill in what was not actually there in the film. So that's part of the freelance work I did in the motion picture industry. Then I had an opportunity to go back to college because there was a digital college in the neighborhood of where I was living, close to San Francisco. And keep in mind, up until this point in my career, I had no training whatsoever in 3D. I had never had a class in Photoshop. I had never had a class in Maya. And I had never had a class ever in illustrating anything. So I managed to produce a career as a successful illustrator by just figuring it out. One thing at a time as I went. Stressful, but you find ways to rise to the occasion. You can. So I went back to school, did a special digital art college, and I got a degree in animation and visual effects. So I learned all about how the details of the motion picture industry works in terms of Foley, sound recording, storyboarding, animation, figurative development, and a lot more than that. It was a marvelous experience, except for how grueling the school was. The school was 5 days a week, 8 hours a day minimum. You go to class all day. Not for 3 hours at a time, not for 1 hour at a time. It was 8 hours at a time, plus a ton of homework on top of that every single day. What happened was, during some of the art classes where they try to develop students into having any kind of art talent, with my background, I'm not even in the same ballpark as all these young college kids. And because the assignments were pretty effortless for me with that stage of my career, my habit was to get up out of my seat and go around and help all my classmates. I'd help them see, I'd help them draw, I'd help them solve problems because I had the background in it. The teacher of that course was also the program director of the entire art department for this college, this digital art college called Expression. She noticed, and she came to me in private and said, Doug, would you like to teach a class for me? No, I hadn't graduated yet. And I said, sure. So I began to teach for this woman who believed in my talent. I began learning how to teach the courses. After I had taught my very first course, she came to me and said, would you like to teach another one? So now I'm teaching two, which, based on how the school is set up, that's full-time. 2 classes, 40 hours a week. That's how the school went. So I did that for a few months, and then she came to me and says, Doug, I'm thinking of going off to Canada to get a master's degree. How would you like my job? And that's how I became the Associate Program Director of Fine Art at Expression College. I hadn't intended to go into academia or become a teacher, but here's this career, fairly nicely paying, being handed to me on a platter. And I went, yeah, okay. And then I became a college administrator over a team of art teachers who I hired after checking out their backgrounds, and I hired the coolest, most talented people I could find, and then I trained them in all the classes that I had already learned how to teach. So that's a lot of what I did after my pinball career was that. I eventually experienced what political assassination in academia actually consists of. I'm a newbie. Yes, I'm an accomplished teacher. Yes, I'm very popular with my students. Yes, I'm producing good results with my students, but there was another woman there who was a veteran who wanted my job. And because she knew how to play politics better than I did, she spent 2 years building a case against me behind my back and then unleashed the knives into my spine from behind. And that was the end of that job. I didn't know how to play that kind of game. My personality doesn't backstab people. My personality is I build people up, not tear them down. That's the kind of teacher I was, that's the kind of person that I am. So that job went away. And I thought, you know what, I like teaching. And I realized if I want a career as a college professor, no one's going to hire you in academia without, ding, 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 a master's degree in that field. I didn't happen to have one. I had 2 college degrees at that point, but no thing. So it was time to go back for a master's degree. I had gone to college for 20 years in my life, been to school and learned a lot. So I ended up at the Academy of Art University in San Francisco in the master's degree program. Similar to my previous experience, after 1 semester, I'm in a figure drawing class. And there's a gentleman with no clothes on sitting on the podium while we're all sitting around the room drawing him. And once again, I'm out of my seat and I'm walking around the room and I'm helping the other students draw. I'm helping them see the model. I'm helping them grasp what visual acuity is all about as an artist in fine art school. And it wasn't another instructor that noticed me, it was the model. This guy, he was in his late 50s with a big pot belly like this, and I'm helping away, and he speaks up and he goes, well, sounds like here someone has a background in teaching. And okay, yeah. He talks to me after class, and he says, I'd like to introduce you to some people. Just because he'd been a model at that school for years and years and years. So he took me over to introduce me to the heads of the illustration school. They met me, they found out about my background, and I was hired instantly. I still have my entire master's degree to get in front of me. And I got a teaching job at this academy, which is one of the top-ranking art schools in the country, along with CalArts down in LA and Parsons in New York City. And our school was right up there. So I'm at a high-powered art college with lots of different degree programs in it. And the head of the illustration department put me to work in my second semester teaching Photoshop, which I had learned on my own, laboriously, so I knew exactly how hard it was to learn and how much a student would love to actually be taught this in a class like I never got. So I taught Photoshop for 6 years to college students. And then I got introduced to the head of the visual development department. Anyone who doesn't know, visual development is concept art. So having failed to be a concept artist for this company, game company in Arizona, now I'm taking and teaching classes in concept art. Then there was also the foundations department, which is the beginning of all art students have to penetrate through the foundations department, teaching color and design. Can you understand, looking at my pinball work, why I would be a good teacher for color and design? Yes, I was a nice fit. So I found myself managing to take one class toward my master's degree every semester, and the other 4 days of the week, I'm teaching for 3 different colleges inside the university. That kept me pretty busy for a while, doing that. I even had the marvelous experience of one of the courses for the visual development school was history of visual development, the history of concept art, going back to the 1800s and the first mechanical devices that ever showed any kind of cinema at all, to Georges Méliès, the Frenchman who moved cinema forward with his marvelous imagination, to Fritz Lang in Metropolis in the 1920s, to Walt Disney and his 9 Old Men in the 30s, and the entire history of animation and visual effects is a class I learned to teach. The way you learn to teach class like that is you take it and you take really copious notes really fast as one of the students in the class. So I had the gratifying moment teaching or learning a course from a previous instructor who's teaching it until we get up until the 1990s. And you know what I found in that course book? My work. I was in the textbooks. Terminator was in the course, along with Indiana Jones. And I was like, wow, is that ever an homage to yourself to come across? Now that I'm teaching college classes and my own artwork is in the class. Well, that was some pretty fun stories I got to tell my students about being that guy. And of course, my students just lit up over actually being taught a class by the guy who's actually in the history of the field that they're studying. So that's part of my background in doing that. I taught at one school or another for, I think it's 11 years of being a college professor. And the way that came finally to an end, because I love teaching. I love the students, and I love putting in extra time with them after class. I cared about my students very deeply. The ones who cared about learning back, I was there for them. Well, along comes someone you might recognize named Donald J. Trump, who got elected to be our president in the U.S. in 2016. And one of the first things he decided to do was enact a trade war with China, which he's still doing now with his tariffs. The result of that had turned out to be the student population at the Academy of Art when I started teaching there was 18,000. It was by far the largest art school in the entire U.S. That's why I got hired in the first place, because they were desperate for teachers. With that student body that large. Within a year, because half the population of students at the Academy of Art came from China. They opened up recruitment offices in Beijing, and wealthy Chinese were sending their kids off to America to learn art, and a lot of them came to my school. So I was used to working with a lot of Chinese students. Thanks to Mr. Trump, a lot of the Chinese decided, I think we'll just send our kids to art school in some other country. Australia or Japan, anywhere else but the US, because they hated what Trump was doing to them economically. I can sympathize. holy cow. But it meant we went from 18,000 to 6,000 enrollment. The student population crashed thanks to the Chinese response to the embargoes and tariffs that Trump enacted on the Chinese. With that giant dramatic drop in enrollment at our school, 800 plus professors were also let go, me among them. So it was, the impact on our school was tremendous. And once again, 2018 was the last year I had a chance to do that kind of teaching. And after that lost that job, I visited every junior college in the entire San Francisco Bay Area, there's a number of them. What do you need taught? Do you need fine art taught? Do you need illustration taught? Do you need computer art taught? Do you need figure drawing taught? Anything you need at all, what do you need? Nobody needed anybody. And I eventually had to just give up on the process, and that was my forced retirement from academia. After my forced retirement from the video game industry, followed my forced retirement from the pinball industry, welcome to a career in art. Mine is not that unusual for anybody who's had a long, successful career as an illustrator designer in the entertainment industry. My story is not that uncommon. Welcome to entertainment. Whether you're trying to make a living as an actor, as a musician, as a director, as a special effects artist, anybody working in entertainment knows my story and how it goes. Nothing unusual about it. It's a tough profession to survive in. I had a fairly long career doing it.
Thank you very much, Doug.